All right. Well, hopefully you got some good gratitudes there. If you want to throw some into the chat box so that people know what you're grateful for, that would be kind of cool. Uh, Here's what we're going to talk about today. So there are a couple of things for me that I really enjoy teaching and training about. One of them is SOI. In fact, that one's probably the biggest one, which we're not going to talk about today. But I love talking about working your SOI because I have just seen the power that comes from it. So that's one. One of the other ones, and there's probably four or five that I just, man, when I'm talking about it, I inside am so passionate about it. And the other one is, which we are going to talk about today, which is just setting appointments. Now, I want to tell you why that is. So I'm going to give you the background on it, and then we're going to talk about setting appointments for a minute. But first, I want to give you the background of why it is that I get so passionate about talking about setting appointments. Now, when I first got my license, so it was 1996, March, I can't remember if it was either end of February, 1st of March, but it doesn't matter. 1996, I got my real estate license. And I went into my broker, and his name was Tom Pierce. I went to Tom and I said, okay, Tom, tell me what to do. Now, I've always been the type of person that at a job, I just go, hey, tell me what to do, and I'm going to go do it. So I go to Tom and I say, all right, tell me what to do, Tom. And he said, okay, go contact your sphere of influence. So I went, put together a letter, sent it to my sphere of influence. Then I went back. What should I do now? Well, he finally, I think, got tired of me coming back and forth. What do I do? Tell me what to do. What should I do? What should I do? And he finally just said this. And he said, okay, look, if you will go knock on doors for 2 hours every day for the next 2 years, you'll never have to knock on doors again after that. And I said, okay, sounds good. Now, as part of that conversation, though, the other thing that he took me through was a process that I'm sure all of you have heard, which he said was something like this. If you talk to 100 people, you should get 10 leads, and from those 10 leads, one should turn into a transaction. Well, I then said, okay, sounds good. Now, with that in mind, so I'm equipped, go knock on doors. He's also told me, make 100 contacts, you're going to get 10 leads, you're going to turn that into a transaction. Great. So I go out and I start knocking on doors. Well, after knocking on doors for 2 hours, I came back to the office because I went and started knocking at 10 o'clock. So I go out and knock from 10 until noon. I come back to the office, I go and eat lunch. After I'm done eating lunch, I'm kind of like, okay, now what do I do? Because I didn't have any business, so what should I do? Well, I started talking to another agent in the office. Her name was Shirley Taiwaliti, which some of you may know her. So I go to Shirley and I say, hey, so what are you doing? Because we had started about the same time. And I said, so Shirley, what are you doing? And she said, well, I'm not really sure what to do either. Maybe we should just get on the phone and make some phone calls. So Shirley and I went and grabbed the phone book, and actually back then what we had was the Kohl's directory, which was a book about this thick. And on this book that was this thick, it would have street addresses and then people's phone numbers based on where they lived, not alphabetical. So we grabbed the Kohl's directory and we just started making calls. Well, what that launched us into was that Shirley and I would go out and knock on doors from 10 until noon. We would get on the phone and make contacts from 1 until about 3 on the phone prospecting. So my goal every day was to make 50 contacts every single day. Now, I didn't make that every single day, but that was the goal every day, was that I was going to try to get 50 contacts every single day. Well, I had been doing that about a year and a half. And about a year and a half into it, I'm now about ready to fail out of the business. In fact, I mentioned this yesterday to a group that I had one transaction. In fact, I can tell you exactly when it was, because it was October 2000, or excuse me, not 2000, 1997. So got my license spring of 1996. It's now October 1997. I had a deal under contract that my wife said to me, if that deal doesn't close, you got to go get a real job. And so thankfully it closed, which it should not have closed, honestly. Like, in fact, the title company ended up having to pay out a title claim on it. I don't know how it closed. There must have been some divine intervention so that I could still be here talking to you today, because honestly, it should not have closed. The builder on it had not paid off all the liens, and luckily the title insurance ended up kicking in to take care of it. But here's the point. I was struggling, and I was doing everything that I was told to do. Go make 50 contacts a day. Well, I went to a seminar, and I ended up meeting a guy there who became somewhat of a mentor for me. At the time, he lived in La Jolla, California, which is down by San Diego. And he now lives in Park City, but he and I became friends. And along the way, we were talking one day, and he explained to me that making contacts is good. It's important. It's crucial that you do it. So please hear that as we talk through this, because it's going to sound like for a minute that maybe I'm saying contacts don't matter, but they matter. So he said contacts are good and important, but at the end of the day, what has been happening to you? And I said, well, I've been making 50 contacts or right around 50 every day and barely making it in the business, barely surviving to make any money at all. And he said, well, so what's the problem? And I said, I don't know. I don't know what the problem is, but it's not working. And he said, well, let me tell you what the issue is. That's the first step in the process, is making contacts. And he says, once you're comfortable with making contacts, and so here's what I'm telling you as well. Once you're comfortable with making contacts, then here's the next thing you need to do. What you need to do is actually have a commitment. Now, George talked about commitment on Monday at the coaching call, and he shared an awesome quote that I have loved for the past probably close to 20 years. And that is by W.H. Murray. Now, W.H. Murray actually was part of the first time that Hillary tried to summit Everest, but he was not able to go up when actually Hillary then went and summited. He wasn't part of that group, but he was before when he tried to do it. And what he learned from that was, until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, and always ineffectiveness. See, what this mentor of mine started telling me is, look, you're committed to making contacts, and guess what I would get? Contacts. At the end of the day, that's what I was getting, was contacts, because that's what I was focused on. And he said, I'm going to have you change your focus. And instead of focusing on making contacts, what I want you to do instead is I want you focused on setting appointments. And so here's what he asked me to do. He said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to commit. Now, remember, we just talked about, and George shared on Monday, that until one is committed, there's hesitancy, the chance to draw back, and always ineffectiveness. Well, he says, I want you to commit. In fact, this friend of mine that I'm talking about, he is the one who shared that quote from W.H. Murray with me clear back in 1997. He said, until one is committed, there's hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. See, once you commit to making a certain number of appointments in a day, he said, then providence moves too, and all sorts of things occur that will help you that otherwise never would have helped you. And I said, great, sounds good to me. So what do I need to do? And he said, okay, starting tomorrow, you commit to setting one new appointment every single day. So set one new appointment every single day that you're going to work. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And he said, okay, but let me make sure you understand. What that means is this: you don't go home until you set an appointment. And I was like, yeah, I could do that. Now, he could tell that I didn't really know what I was committing to. And so what he said to me was, he said, okay, Russ, look, I want to make sure you're really, really crystal clear on what's going on with this. You don't go home tomorrow. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. And he said, okay, let me just make sure. You go home tonight and you tell your wife, I am not coming home tomorrow if I do not set an appointment. And I was like, oh, like, you mean I really have to set an appointment? And he's like, yeah, that's what it means to be committed. It's burn the boats. We're not, the only way we get out of here is by setting an appointment. And I said, ooh, I don't know if I could do that. Well, he got me to commit to do it for 1 week, just for 1 week, to commit to, look, I won't go home until I set an appointment. Well, so what I did is that then had me focused on appointments, not necessarily on contacts. Now keep in mind, we want to keep track of our contacts, because that's how we figure out how effective we are in going from contacts to appointments, making sure that we're getting better. But what's most important is that appointment. And so what he said to me is, here's what you're going to do. Tomorrow, you will go to work and you will not stop until you get an appointment. And I said, great. Now, remember I told you already that I would typically go out knocking on doors at 10? Well, as a result of that, I would typically show up to the office at about 9. And then Shirley and I would go into a conference room and we would role play together. And we would typically role play, hey, this person said this to me while we were door knocking and I didn't know what to say. And what would you say here? So we would role play that. Then we would jump in the car, we'd go out door knocking. Well, now all of a sudden I have to commit to making an appointment before I go home. Now let me ask you, if you made that same commitment, you will not go home today or starting tomorrow, but still it's early enough today, maybe today. If you, well, let's do it for tomorrow. If you know tomorrow you can't go home, what time would you show up and start working? I'll tell you what, for me, like once I knew that, like all of a sudden I'm like, hold on a minute. I can't go home until I set an appointment. So if that's the case, I'm getting to the office early. So I was at the office by 7:30. I was pulling the for sale by owners. I was pulling the expireds, getting the phone numbers, looking all of that stuff up. So that come 8 o'clock, man, I was dialing. And man, I was jumping on calling. Now, here's the other question for you. If you had to set an appointment today, your going home depended on it, or maybe let's step it up even higher than that. Your life depended on it for some reason. What would you do? Who would you call? How would you go about setting an appointment today if you had to do it? Well, for me, I was like, I'm going to start calling every lead that I ever had. So I jumped on the phone, and first thing I did, I'm calling every single lead that I have, calling it to try to get an appointment. Well, now here's the good news. Before 10 o'clock, I had set an appointment. So if within 2 hours, I had set an appointment. Now, I left out one piece that I forgot to tell you that was important to this. What this guy told me is if you change your focus from contacts to appointments, you'll prospect half as much, but double your income. Well, who likes the idea of half the prospecting, double the income? I said, sign me up. So here's what happened. Now remember, I was going out knocking on doors, getting 50 contacts, and I will tell you, in a week, I might have gotten 1 or 2 appointments, maybe. Well, now all of a sudden I switched this to focus on setting the appointment, not on making the contact. Now, once I did that, within 2 hours, I had set an appointment. Well, every single day for that week, I set an appointment, and typically, most of the days, I had done it within 2 hours. So he was right on to, I was getting an appointment in less than 2 hours, typically, by following this process. Now, here's what I really wanted to focus on with you guys today. Actually, let me give you the end of the story real quick. The next year, my income had doubled by doing that. I prospected probably half as much, but I had doubled my income. The next year, I had doubled my income again. And the next year, I almost doubled it again. It wasn't quite a double again. But I will tell you, all I did, the only thing I did differently, which isn't really true, but the thing that got me changing and going was I focused on one appointment every single day, and don't go home until you do it. It got to the point with my wife where what would happen is I would walk in the door, and the first thing she would say to me is, did you set your appointment? See, we had an agreement that if I didn't have an appointment, she would then point at the door and go, okay, get out of here. Don't come home. So now the good news is I know my wife, and knew if I walk in the door without an appointment, she literally would have thrown me out until I set the appointment. So for me, I didn't go home until I set the appointment. But when I know that, and when you know that, like commit to it, using that W.H. Murray quote, when one fully commits, then providence moves too. See, all sorts of things happen. And I can tell you from my experience, that is exactly what happened, is all sorts of things started to happen to get me that one appointment because of it. Now, let me give you one other piece of this too that came as this providence moves too and all sorts of things occur. By me committing to that, I showed up every single day at the office. I was there at 7:30. Now, by me being there at 7:30, the first thing I would do every day when I walked in, I would turn on the phone system. And occasionally, somebody would call in and I would answer the phone, because at 7:30, there was, at that office that I was in, nobody was there. It was me. The first person was the receptionist, would show up usually at 8. That was typically the first person there. Well, so since I was there, I was turning on the phone system. I would answer the phone. Well, one particular day, I know exactly where I was at in the office. I was walking back to pull up the phone numbers for the expireds. And as I walked back there to get the phone numbers out of that big, thick book I was telling you, the coal directory, I walked back there to grab the book, the phone rings. I pick, and it was back then we had the phone on the wall and it had the long cord on it like you did when you were a kid. I pick up the phone and I answer it, and the lady says, my name is Stephanie. I work with EquiCredit out of Florida, and I just was calling to see, I've got 2 homes that I need to sell, foreclosures. Could you help me with that? And I said, let me think about it. Yeah. that led to a stream of business. So from that W.H. Murray quote, all sorts of things issue from that decision that would have never otherwise occurred. See, had I not committed to that, there is no chance I'm at the office at 7:30 in the morning. And I don't know what made me decide to start to turn on the phone every day, but I did. And it turned into a ton of business for me because of making that one commitment. See, I used to have on my desk a picture of a beat up baseball. You guys know I love baseball. A beat up baseball that said, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I just think that is so true. So that's what I learned is when you commit to this, it will work. Providence moves too, but you got to be fully committed. All right. So here's what I want to talk to you about is I have been observing and I have spent ever since this pandemic has started, I have tried to listen to people making calls pretty much every day. Now it doesn't happen every day, but I try every single day to get on and listen to people making calls. And as I'm doing that, here's what I am observing. Here's what's fascinating. And those of you that when we did the virtual call around a few weeks ago, here's what I observed. It was interesting to listen to people and to watch what happens. It's fascinating how one person can get on and make a phone call to a prospect, whether it's a for sale by owner, expired, just listed, an internet call, I don't care what it is. But they can get on and make one phone call to that person and get shut down really, really hard. Somebody else who's standing in the same aisle or a couple of aisles away in the prospecting area here at Union Park gets on and calls that same exact for sale by owner and sets an appointment. Now, I asked myself, why is it that two people could call the same person within minutes of each other and one set an appointment and one not? Now, as I started to think about that, that led me to then thinking of, so what is it about our communication that makes that difference? Now, those of you that participated in the Elevate 2020 that was either done in California or Utah. Now, I wasn't at the one in California, so I can't speak to if George said this, but I'm guessing he did. The biggest takeaway that I got out of that was something that I had never heard him say before. Now, he may have said it, but I didn't hear it. And that was this. If your presence isn't getting you what you want, your words won't either. And I love that. See, at the end of the day, what we talk about consistently is our job as agents is to be a leader. And the number one skill we have is communication. So see, the reason that one person can go set an appointment when somebody else doesn't is it is down to their ability to communicate. And so here's what I wanted to hit on with you guys for a few minutes is this. There's three things that I want to talk about with you that I think make the difference in setting appointments. The first one is this. You have got to be repeating and affirming. We have to repeat and affirm. If you are not repeating and affirming on your calls, when you're making your calls, if you do not repeat and affirm, then that's the first strike against you. You got to be repeating and affirming. That has got to happen. Now, here's the thing. What I have observed people do, though, is sometimes we do this. We repeat and affirm like this. Oh, you're not moving? Okay, that's great. That's not repeating and I mean, it is. It's repeating and affirming, but it's not going to be effective. See, I have written on the board here, I don't know if you guys can see it, but I've got the UCLA study on the board up here about communication. 7% of our communication is the words. See, using the words of repeating and affirming is 7% of that communication. So yes, we got to repeat and affirm, and we want to repeat back the words that they used and tell them that's great, or, oh, that's disappointing, whatever it is, a positive affirmation or a negative one, depending on what they have done with it. But that's only 7%. See, what I have found, the secret to it is we have to add this 38%, which is the tone. See, when somebody says we're not moving, you've got to go, oh, you're not moving? Hey, totally understand. If I were you, I probably wouldn't be moving either. Or let's do this. I ask somebody, how long have you lived at this address? And they say, oh, I've lived here for 15 years. If you say to the person, oh, 15 years, that's great. That doesn't sound like you're excited about it, that you think it's great. Instead, we got to do it this way. 15 years, wow. It sounds like you must just really love being in this area then. Something like that. See, if you get excited with them for it, 15 years, wow. Yeah, that's a long time to be in one area. Good for you. Like when you do that, you're going to get a better chance of setting an appointment by really doing that. In fact, I jokingly said to an agent, and he probably is on the call here right now. I jokingly said the other day, you hear George say you need to go to people before they go golfing, you need to go stop by and get some game. Well, that's what I said to this agent. Like, hey, go stop by the store and get some personality. Like you got to have some personality on this. This is a performance that you are doing for this contact. And if you want to get them to stay for the performance, you got to keep up and making sure you're giving them the performance. So we got to use our tone, and then 55% of it's body language. So especially when you're on the phone, make sure that I'm going to get a little closer here to the computer for a second. If you're on the phone, you got to use your facial expressions. If they say something that you would be saying, oh, that's interesting, you got to do something like, wow, like notice my eyebrows and how I'm kind of squinting a little. Wow, that's interesting. See, if you're going to say that to somebody, wow, that's interesting, you get your body language involved in this process with it as well. If you get your body language involved, the message is going to come through clearer. In fact, here's what I will tell you. I have to kind of laugh. I'm going to throw Jeremy under the bus. I'm guessing he's not on, but if he is, I'm still going to do it anyway. If you guys noticed on Friday when he did Morning Ascent, when we got to the end of the affirmations here, we get to the end and we always do this. I keep positive, fun, and exciting thoughts in my mind at all times. Yes. Like I had to laugh because if you were watching, he went like this. I keep positive, exciting, fun, and productive thoughts in my mind at all times. Like I was like, serious? Like that's not very exciting, Jeremy. Come on. So that's what I'm talking about when you're prospecting. So number one, we got to repeat and affirm. But when we repeat and affirm, you got to do it like you actually mean it. Talk like you're talking to a friend. If they were sharing something sad with you, you're not going to go, oh, well, that's interesting. You're going to say, oh, man. Like you're going to have emotion behind it. Get some emotion behind your prospecting, and you're going to see a bigger difference in it. Number two thing is empathy. Make sure that you are empathizing with them. Especially, so somebody calling for sale by owners or expireds, I'm telling you what, you have got to have the empathy. Hey, if I were you, I'd feel the same way. When they say, I'm selling it for sale by owner because I want to save the commission. Hey, if I were you, I'd want to save the commission too. And again, say it like you mean it. You got to say it like you mean it for that to come through. The reason one person can get an appointment and another one doesn't is because of how they're doing what I'm talking about right now. Have that empathy with it. You got to empathize with them. So one is repeat and affirm. Two, empathize. And then here's number three. This one, honestly, is the one that fascinates me the most. And that is this. You have to ask for an appointment. If you want to get an appointment, you have to ask. Now, here's the thing. There are only 5 ways in the English language that you can ask for an appointment. That's it. If you say anything other than these 5 things, you're not asking for an appointment. Now, let me show you what I mean. If you say to somebody, is there a time we can get together? That is not asking for an appointment. That's asking if it is possible, if somewhere in time there exists that you could get together. Well, the answer to that is yes. We already know that. So that's not asking for an appointment. The 5 ways you can ask for an appointment is this. What time, which time, how soon, when, and where. That's it. So I'll say them again because I can see people writing it down. What time, which time, how soon, when, and where. What time, which time, how soon, when, and where. Now, you will hear us say all the time, what works better for you, afternoons or evenings? That is just a way of saying which time works better for you, afternoons or evenings. So that is a which time. See, what time are we going to get together? Which time should we get together? How soon should we get together? When should we get together? And where should we meet? At the end of the day, those are the only 5 ways in the English language you can ask for an appointment. If you say, can we get together? You're asking about possibilities. Is it possible to get together? We already know the answer is yes, it is possible. So why would we ever say, can we get together? Meaning, if you and your loved one were going to go see a movie, which hopefully we'll get to do that again soon here, but you're going to go see a movie, you wouldn't, if you had decided you were going to a movie, we're going to a movie, you wouldn't go home and say, hey, can we go to a movie? Because your significant other would say, we already decided we were. Your only question would be, when? When are we going to go? Or which movie should we go to? Notice that. There's only 5 ways in the English language. If you ask, here's the one that I love the most that I hear agents say. Why don't we get together? Why don't we get together is not asking for an appointment. What you're asking is the reason you're not going to get together. Now, the way your brain works is like a computer. And here's the thing. In fact, if I asked you right now, why don't you give me some money? You're not inclined to give me money. What are you going to tell me if I say, why don't you give me some money? See, what you're going to tell me is the reason you're not going to give me money. So if you're prospecting, you say to someone, why don't we get together? They're going to tell you the reason you're not going to get together. See, the words, even though they're only 7%, matter. They matter big time. Because if you say, why don't we get together? They're going to tell you the reason you're not going to get together. So instead, we want to use it as what time, which time, how soon, when, and where. Now, so just as a reminder, here's what I want you to work on today. I want you to work on 2 things. Number 1, how many appointments will you set today? Throw it in the chat box. What will you commit to today in terms of a number of appointments you will set before you go home? So throw something in the chat box. This part of making a commitment is get it out there public. Let the universe know, I am going to do this. How many appointments will you set? Number 2 thing that I want you to do is work on repeating and affirming today in your calls. I want you to work on the empathy and make sure when you ask for an appointment, you are using one of the 5. What time, which time, how soon, when, and where. If you will do that, watch what happens. Watch how it will change the number of appointments you end up setting. So commit to it and then see what happens. All right, guys, thanks for being with me today. We're gonna finish up here in just 1 minute with some affirmations, but just keep in mind that what you focus on, you will get. And if you will focus on the appointments, you're going to get appointments. So thanks for being with me, guys.